Only in America.
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 Hey there, it is Ali. Thank you for listening to Only in America. A quick note before we get started this week. We're conducting a listener survey, and we would love to hear from you. Take a minute to answer some quick questions at immigrationforum.org/podcast, and you'll be entered for a chance to win a signed copy of my book, There Goes the Neighborhood: How Communities Overcome Prejudice and Meet the Challenge of American Immigration. Just a few extra minutes of your time would be so incredibly helpful, and it would ensure that Only in America continues to bring you the stories that you want to hear. Thank you in advance. Now, on with the show. Welcome to Only in America. I'm Ali Noorani. This week, a sheriff explains how federal immigration enforcement affects his department's mission to keep all community members safe.
Immigration policy ties into everything we do, in anything we do in public service right now. Oftentimes it comes to us through our doors as we take people in, people that have been incarcerated or held pre-trial or sentenced. And that's really where much of our first impact of the immigration policies and what's going on in this country right now hit us.
And why a national task force is dedicated to a smarter conversation on immigration and law enforcement.
We face this issue every day in our front door, and I needed to connect with others that are seeing the same things that I'm seeing to make sure that as these policies are being shaped, that law enforcement has a seat at the table and our interests and the interests and needs of our constituents are being heard.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani. A few years ago, a group of law enforcement officials from across the country came together to speak with one voice on a serious issue that they face. Their communities would only be safe if local law enforcement could establish trust with all residents, regardless of immigration status. The resulting Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force convenes police chiefs and sheriffs from across the country. The task force of almost 140 members provides a platform to weigh in on the impact that federal immigration policies have on local public safety. One of those members is Sheriff Peter Koutoujian, who is the grandson of Armenian refugees and the great-grandson of Irish immigrants. Sheriff Koutoujian is dedicated to building trust with all residents of the incredibly large and diverse Middlesex County. I've known Sheriff Koutoujian for years. In fact, I've known him since the days that I began to work on immigration policy back in, say, 2004 when I ran the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. At that point, Sheriff Koutoujian was Representative Koutoujian, and he was one of our greatest champions as we advocated for an in-state tuition bill for undocumented immigrants. In addition to being sheriff of Middlesex County in Massachusetts, Sheriff Koutoujian is also president of the Massachusetts Sheriff's Association and incoming president of the Major County Sheriffs of America. His position as an elected official gives him a unique platform to understand the narrative around public safety, immigration enforcement, and law enforcement in America. We recently chatted about the local effects of federal immigration policies and the importance of public service. Sheriff Koutoujian, thank you so much for joining. We've known each other for a long, long time, but I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while, so thank you.
Well, it's great to be with you, Ali. You know, as you said, we've known each other for a long time. I had no idea that you would rise to such heights and lead this country in so many important ways. And as much as you impressed me then, you impress me even more now on this larger stage that you have occupied.
You know, we can just end the interview right here. I'm good with that.
That's it. We're good. Drop the mic.
Right. That's a wrap, folks. We're out of here. Well, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. So I'd be happy to just to talk about me the entire time, but that's a different conversation. Let's talk about you. So you have an interesting story that gets you to be sheriff of Middlesex County. But before we even get to your role as sheriff, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? What's your family story, if you will?
Well, I'm a kid from Waltham, Massachusetts, still living in Waltham, Massachusetts. I'm the grandson of Armenian refugees and the great-grandson of Irish great-grandparents that were looking for opportunity. My Armenian grandparents came directly from historic Armenia, fleeing the genocide that caused so much death and absolute devastation. The stories that I have heard were terrible, very much what is sadly still going on today. My father was raised by two Armenian refugees that didn't speak almost any English, came to this country looking for refuge and found incredible opportunity. In fact, 3 of their 4 children, their 3 sons, ended up serving in the military. And my Armenian grandparents became the greatest patriots, that you could imagine in this country, because they loved this country for everything it did for their family. And my mother's side, again, looking for opportunity, coming from Ireland. Both of my parents were public servants. My mother was a teacher, my father a city official in my hometown. And really, without even knowing that they had done so, they imbued me with a sense of public service that I've come to value so much. It was about, after serving 4 years as a prosecutor and 14 years as a legislator, I became sheriff in 2011 when Governor Deval Patrick appointed me to fill the remainder of a vacancy in office. I was then subsequently elected in 2012 and again in 2016. It was not a job, interestingly, that I never aspired to, nor did I covet for even a moment, until someone reached out to me and said, you should think about asking the governor for this appointment because you might be well suited to it. My initial reaction was I was not that interested. And then I started looking more into the job, even though I had been a prosecutor working in the system, looking more into the job and just seeing the incredible impact you can have of the lives of individuals and their families and our communities. And so that has been how I ended up where I am. As I say to many people, sometimes you don't have to have that path that you've thought through in front of you. Sometimes you just do some good things that you enjoy very much, and other opportunities and blessings arrive in your professional life as well. And that's been the story in my life.
So how did your family get to Waltham to begin with?
So my Irish great-grandparents ended up in Needham and Newton area, but my Armenian grandparents ended up in Waltham. Many of the Armenian community, as with many communities, first came to Massachusetts to Worcester, or as the Armenians would say, Worcester. So they went to Worcester as an immigrant population finding jobs. There was jobs and opportunities there. And then it's interesting because people don't understand how they ended up in Watertown. They started in Worcester, they ended up in Watertown because then the Hood rubber plant opened and there were jobs there. And so the Armenians started moving to Watertown, which then became the epicenter of the Armenian American community in this country. And so my grandparents, when they were thinking about buying, they decided to move to the next town over, which is Waltham. And for many of their relatives, they could not for the life of them understand why my grandparents would move to Waltham. It was in the country. Why would they move to the country? Yet it was really one town over.
I lived in Boston for 10 years, and Middlesex County to me was always such an interesting place, and it's kind of like the hidden jewel of Massachusetts, if you will. Everybody talks about Boston or Cambridge or the Cape or whatever, but Middlesex County I just thought was an incredible place just for its diversity.
It's an incredibly diverse county. It is 1.6 million people, so it is one of the largest counties in the entire country. It has a vast variety of cities and towns, ranging from significant urban populations to many suburban, even to rural populations. It tends to be a county that overall is relatively well off, relatively well educated, has those advantages, with some of those pockets in the community that have so many more struggles with which we can provide support, for whom we can provide support because of the community we've built in Middlesex County. And quite honestly, much of what's going on in the country in sort of progressive programming and ideas and piloting is being done in Middlesex County in many ways right now. And that is honestly being driven even further by what we're doing here in the Middlesex Sheriff's Office.
What does your day look like? What surprises you every day? It's like, you know what? I never thought as sheriff I get to do this.
I got to tell you, Ali, every day is so different. One of my great frustrations is people send me emails. And the fact is, it's a large county and I'm always doing something. I'm always speaking or moving or doing something. So I really don't have very little time to sit at a desk and go through, what turns out to be hundreds of emails, sometimes a day. So that has been my frustration. But it's really the reason that frustration exists is because the great opportunities of running around a large county and being engaged in so many programs and really, quite honestly, driving so much, not what's happening now just in Middlesex County, but across the nation in many ways. You may know that I'm the president of the Massachusetts Sheriff's Association. I'm the incoming president of the Major County Sheriffs of America. And so more and more, as we have grown in the programming we have brought to Middlesex County and the Sheriff's Office, we're now growing on a national level. And so, quite honestly, I'm spending more time traveling nationally, presenting nationally or hosting a number of groups from around the country and sometimes even around the world that are coming to see what we're doing here, which is really exciting and validating at the same time as it is kind of daunting and exhausting at the same time. But as I've spoken to you about before, I've got incredible people surrounding me. I've got incredible staff that work here. And with a team like we have, quite honestly, we're able to do an incredible amount of work, much more than one would expect a shop like ours to get done because of the incredible talent pool and staff that we have at the Middlesex Sheriff's Office.
So then how does immigration policy and immigration enforcement interact with what you are doing as the sheriff of Middlesex County?
Immigration policy ties into everything we do in anything we do in public service right now. Oftentimes it comes to us through our doors as we take people in, people that have been incarcerated or held pre-trial or sentenced. And that's really where much of our first impact of the immigration policies and what's going on in this country right now hit us.
So then the question of, for example, detainer policy, how does that play out, as you are taking in folks who have been arrested for one reason or another? How does that play out for you at the county level?
I joined Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force with you, Ali, because, sheriffs need to weigh in on what the impact on public safety and the officer sheriff is with regard to immigration. We face this issue every day in our front door, and I needed to connect with others that are seeing the same things that I'm seeing to make sure that as these policies are being shaped, that law enforcement has a seat at the table and our interests and needs of our constituents are being heard. Also, the task force provides law enforcement the opportunity to come together and speak with one voice, which is really powerful. And honestly, when I'm looking to speak with other colleagues, I go to this organization. So more specifically on issues like ICE detainers, there's been a lot of confusion around this issue in recent years. But simply put, if I don't have probable cause to hold these individuals beyond their end of stay, I will not hold these individuals beyond their end of stay. The Morales versus Chadbourne decision in Rhode Island, the First Circuit Court of Appeals held that detaining someone beyond their release date is an arrest under the Fourth Amendment, and the court found that the Fourth Amendment requires ICE to have probable cause to issue such a detainer request. And more recently in Massachusetts, we've had very specific language. So stepping from sort of a federal platform into a state platform dealing with the immigration issue, our Supreme Judicial Court ruled that local law enforcement officials don't have the authority under state law to detain a person based solely on a request from ICE. And they concluded that state law provides no authority to Massachusetts to arrest and hold an individual solely on the basis of a federal civil immigration detainer beyond the time that the individual would otherwise be entitled to be released from state custody. So we may not always agree on everything, but the opportunity to exchange a lot of the issues around these detainers is really important to us here at the Middlesex Sheriff's Office.
But it also has to be important to have that policy in place in terms of being able to maintain the trust with the immigrant community, given just the incredible diversity of the county. So how do you build that bridge between the policy position you're taking and the questions that community members have, or even the assumptions that community members have?
Well, honestly, Ali, that, a jail is not a fortress on a hill. It's part of a community. And as part of that community, you need to have community involvement. But most importantly, you have to have the trust of the community. And if you don't have that trust, you can't do your job. You can't hold people safely and securely, and you can't help them with their rehabilitated reentry when they're ready to leave your custody. So just having that relationship with the community is core to everything else that we do here in the Middlesex Sheriff's Office.
And then, so for your deputies, when they're going out every morning or every evening, what's your message to them to really ensure that folks do feel like they can turn to their sheriff deputy for that question?
Well, one of the things that we do here in Massachusetts is our sheriff's offices are more predominantly focused on corrections. Each of the city's police departments have their own patrol function, and they're all incorporated areas. So we don't have primary patrol in any area, but we support our local law enforcement. So our partners are all of these local law enforcement. Part of what's really important is that people need to feel comfortable in approaching these guardians of our community, because if they don't feel comfortable, they won't approach, and they will be victimized and re-victimized. And those that victimize them will be victimizing others, whether they're here as an immigrant or as a citizen or here in any fashion. This is something, if we don't have this relationship, then we will not be able to do our jobs in law enforcement.
And one of the biggest differences I've found between the police chief and then a sheriff is the fact that overwhelming majority of sheriffs out there are elected officials. So that means that you're facing a completely different kind of pressure than a police chief who's, appointed by their mayor typically. So when you're out there on the campaign trail, how are you helping the broader public understand what is the sheriff's role and what isn't the sheriff's role when it comes to immigration issues?
Well, I think it's really important as we speak with the public. It's kind of a great opportunity to educate the public. Police chiefs will do so, but as you said, they are appointed. As an elected official, we like to think that we're more in tune with our communities because we're more answerable more directly to our communities. We're not appointed by an authority who is then responsible to the community, a more indirect relationship. We are more directly involved with our communities than appointed officials. So with that being said, our opportunity to engage and to educate the public is much greater as well. So that's something that I really enjoy, and I think most sheriffs do in describing this is what we're seeing, because whether or not it's during election seasons, we are out engaged, speaking in so many ways with individuals, but in larger and smaller groups as well, in opportunities that we can tell people what's going on right now.
It feels like the immigration debate, if you will, is one very large part policy and what's happening, whether it's at the federal, state, or the local level. But then there's the other part of the debate itself and the rhetoric. And you see what happens in El Paso, and you just feel the fear and the anxiety that is settling over the immigrant community. What do you feel is the appropriate role for you as sheriff to help people feel like they're safe in their own community?
Yeah, this is something that always comes up, and certainly we have a responsibility and a role with regard to the public safety of our communities. But what's also really important is that other law enforcement agencies, both on the county level, the municipal level, the county level, the state level, and the federal level, have their roles and responsibilities. And we all, in some ways, need to stay in our lane. And the fact is that much of the immigration policy out there are really federal issues and need to be handled by the federal authorities. We got plenty to do in our jobs right now without having to do the job of other agencies. I really feel that very strongly. So many are quick to jump in and say, we need to do this, we need to do this. Well, I think that people need to do their jobs. I've got plenty to do on my job, and I need to do that job right. I don't need to dilute what I do on my job as a sheriff by doing other agencies, especially the federal agencies' job on immigration issues.
Couldn't agree more. There's a line there that just keeps getting blurred. Now, so as you step into this role as leading the major county sheriffs, what would you like to see the sheriff's community start to address at the federal level?
Well, I just feel like we need to restore faith in the rule of law and enforcing immigration laws fairly by targeting safety threats, not people who are adding to our communities and our economy, and allow us in law enforcement to build trust with our communities, the individuals in our communities, so that we can keep everyone safer. At the border, my belief is, in hearing from some of my colleagues that are on the border, that we need to invest our resources strategically so that we're targeting smugglers and cartels. I mean, there is drug smuggling and human trafficking going on the border. We need to target smugglers and cartels while showing compassion to people that are fleeing very desperate situations, very much like my grandparents fled. And we need to create a way for undocumented immigrants to be able to come out of the shadows, to make restitution, and to begin working their way towards earning legal status and hopefully eventual citizenship. We need to boost our security and our standing in the world by welcoming properly vetted refugees. And we need to honor our history and improve our legal immigration process so it benefits all Americans and really balances the needs of families and employers in each of our communities as well.
Seems like you have a very busy year ahead of you.
It's a lot going on, but I got to tell you, Ali, I love the work that I get to do. I love my job. I love being sheriff. My entire career, very much like yours, I think, too, Ali, and with different forms of employment, has been based on public service. And I always find that, and very much this can go for you too, that public service, like what I get to do, is public service in much more of its purest form or essence. I get to help those that are incarcerated. And there's not many people that are ready to advocate for people that don't have advocates. And those would be the incarcerated, those might be the homeless, those might be the disabled, and those might be refugees, right?
Yeah.
They don't have anyone ready to advocate for them. And so for me, this is one of the most inspiring parts of my job and my proof to my community that I care about public service, that this is whom I choose to serve. Many people don't know the great blessing of real public service. They don't understand how much good it can bring to you and your community at the same time. And so part of what I hope to do is to go out and speak to young people, especially, about the value of public service. You don't always have to get that private sector job. You don't always have to make a fortune. You could do such good work and feel such value and be so happy every day that you go home that you did something worthwhile each day. That's the way that I feel every day when I go home to my family.
I couldn't agree more. Like last week, for example, I was speaking to a group of young men of color who were going on to teach in early learning classrooms. And to each group, I said, you know what? If you have any chance to work in the public sector, whatever it is, just grab it. You're going to feel like you're delivering incredible value, but you're just going to learn so much. And I still don't even realize everything that I learned, in the few years that I worked for the city of Boston. So I couldn't agree more.
Well, think about all the people that you've impacted, Ali, that you will never know that you impacted because they're just going about their lives. But in some way, you undertook an action or maybe gave them a little advice that impacted them in a way that you'll never know the beautiful impact you've had on people's lives. And that's just something that people have to understand. You don't always get the direct satisfaction. But the fact is, if you start thinking about you need that, then you're in the wrong business after all, right?
Right. And the immigrant and the refugee community, whether they're, there's so many, for example, police departments and sheriff's offices across the country who are employing immigrants and refugees. There's a value add to that type of public service in so many different ways.
That's right. Again, these are the populations that don't have any advocates, except for people like you and maybe me to a degree. It's really important that we do so and we drive other people to do so in the same way too.
Well, Sheriff, I have one last question for you. The name of the podcast is Only in America. So ask everybody this question at the end just to finish this sentence. Only in America, ...
Geez, I think I just described so much about that right there. Only in America could the grandson and great-grandson of immigrants that sought not just refuge, but opportunity in this country could have had a son and then grandson that could have, I believe, made such an impact. I mean, when I think about this country and the immigrants that have come here and that each generation grows and becomes better and stronger for their predecessing family's efforts, that's something that's really special to me because I'm a patriot at heart. And I believe that immigration and immigrants are what make this country strong and beautiful and resilient. And we should never forget that when we think about our patriotism, quite honestly.
Sheriff, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to call you a friend for many, many years, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you in the time ahead. So thanks so much for joining today.
And thank you for all of your advice and counsel, Ali. Every time that I have a question, I have a concern, I have a wonder, so to speak, I give you a call, and you always, always, always give me sage advice, quite honestly. So thank you so much for what you do, Ali.
Hey, thank you.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
A few weeks ago, the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force published an open letter in English and Spanish to immigrant communities around the country. Signatories underscored their commitment to serving all community members regardless of immigration status. As Sheriff Koutoujian mentioned, community trust is core to law enforcement's mission and duty. If immigrants are afraid that reporting a crime can jeopardize their own security, we are all less safe. In fact, the anti-immigrant rhetoric that's creating such fear in these communities is based on a misconception about immigrants and crime. As the task force points out in a fact sheet, decades of research show that immigrants are actually committing crimes at a lower rate than native-born Americans. To explain this trend, sociologists and demographers have noted that immigrant communities tend to have stronger families and cultural and religious beliefs, which tend to be buffers against crime. It's also worth noting why most immigrants come to the United States: to work and to create a better life for their children. Getting into trouble with the law risks all of that hard work. Meanwhile, intensified anti-immigrant rhetoric coupled with ramped-up immigration enforcement is actually making community members less safe. The New York Times reported that in 2017, Houston saw a 16% drop in domestic violence reports from the Hispanic community. Art Acevedo, Houston Police Chief and Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force co-chair, blamed the decline on reporting crimes on growing fears among immigrants that cooperating with law enforcement could put them and their families at risk. So, if we're going to ensure the safety of our communities, we need federal immigration policies that allow local law enforcement to build trust, something that won't happen if we continue to let fear drive the national immigration conversation. Sheriff Koutoujian is the Sheriff of Middlesex County, Massachusetts. You can find more information on Sheriff Koutoujian at our website, immigrationforum.org. And for more information on the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force, visit leitf.org. immigrationforum.org. And don't forget to complete your listener survey at immigrationforum.org/podcast to help us bring you impactful, informed conversations. Only in America is produced and edited by Emily Chow, Joanna Taylor, and Megan Wetmore. Kathleen Farrell is the executive producer. I'm Ali Nurani, and thank you for listening to Only in America.